Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to an all-new reaction and review. Tonight, guys, we are looking at a SpongeBob special from 2013. Yes, we are talking about It Came from Goo Lagoon. Now, most people kind of have a basic understanding of what happened to the SpongeBob series. It became one of Nickelodeon's most popular cash cows. Then, as things went on, the episodes just kind of started to suck. Now, with that said, I recently decided I would catch up because I stopped watching about season 9. In fact, I directly remember because I was getting older, I was noticing that it wasn't as good as I thought it was and all that. And I was sort of watching the newer episodes that were recommended to me. And I figured, why not just pick up where I left off? And the first episode, I remember the first episode that Nickelodeon announced that I did not watch the night of premiere, and that I still have not watched, was It Came from Goo Lagoon. Now, I watched a couple episodes after that before I just stopped watching really television entirely. Things like Plankton's Pet and Safe Deposit Crabs, and unfortunately, SpongeBob You're Fired. However, I still have not watched this one, and I have noticed that this episode has not really gotten much conversation around it in the communities I hang out in that are filled with animation fans, that are filled with SpongeBob fans. This episode is almost like never talked about. And the other thing I want to note is that as SpongeBob kind of entered season 10 and 11, the show became much more, I think, Ren and Stimpy-esque is a good way of putting it. So I'm a little curious where this falls. Now, I don't know if this is going to be any good, but the only way I'm going to find is if I shut up and I press play, and that's what I'm going to do. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's watch It Came from Goo Lagoon. Well, I'll give this episode this. It's getting right to the point. We're 2 minutes in, and already we've seen what I assumed came from Goo Lagoon. Huh. You know what? I'll give it that. It's not wasting my time. Don't know if it's going to be good, though, but hey, that's something. Okay, small nitpick, but how did Squidward not know SpongeBob and Patrick were going to go to the beach today? I mean, they're the two loudest people in the entirety of Bikini Bottom, and they live literally right next to him. You'd think that he'd overhear them playing, because this isn't like in, I don't know, Atlantis Squarepants, where changing circumstances is what caused SpongeBob and Patrick to go where Squidward was. No, this is something they had to have been to some extent planning out, or at least Squidward had some way of knowing about. Yet he's surprised? That just seems off to me. So Sandy knows these things are dangerous, and instead of just telling SpongeBob and Patrick why it is they're dangerous, she just repeats that they're dangerous over and over again, and then gets surprised when nobody listens. Especially considering not even Plankton is listening, and he's the second most scientifically literate character in the show, right behind Sandy. So, yeah, what do you expect? Why not just describe why they're so dangerous? Now, you can't have that. Can't have that. You got to keep speaking in vague terms about it. Again, Sandy had another chance, this time on the news, to explain why these goo bubbles were supposedly dangerous. And what does she do? She just says, they're dangerous, end of story. She didn't start to explain why and then got cut off or something. She didn't even try and explain it. It's a shame because this episode has some really funny writing. But I bluntly cannot ignore this many story issues. I really can't. So let me get this straight. Sandy's been spending the entire episode saying that this stuff is dangerous and you shouldn't play with it, and if we mess with it, the end will be near. And then she tells Perch Perkins she needs to run tests in order to figure out just how dangerous it is. And she tells Patrick she has no idea what would happen if it popped. What? Sandy's normally the smart one. What the heck is this? So Sandy has missiles attached to her submarine. I am not entirely sure how I feel about that. Did they just make an electric Boogaloo reference? I'll admit, I did not expect that, and you know what? I very much enjoy that. Well, guys, that was It Came from Goo Lagoon. Uh, that was a pretty funny climax, truth be told. That was so many fake outs put into one. Honest to God, I'm not going to ruin it for you guys because there were like the entire last 7 or 8 minutes were just fake out after fake out. And honest to God, each one was funnier than the last. Uh, okay, so let's start with writing. The writing here, I'm really in two minds about the writing. On one hand, there's the actual comedy of the episode, which is really good, which is really funny, which is what classic SpongeBob, somewhat absurdism, random screwball comedy, that in my opinion is done really well. Okay, like really well. Um, this is definitely funnier than either of the two Pony Life episodes I've reviewed so far, most notably because this actually got me to laugh more than once. However, on the other hand, there's the characterization, and I feel personally the plot itself was a little contrived. Now, mind you, this doesn't matter because the episode is so funny, and you probably don't care about it. However, it is worth mentioning because I'm a reviewer, that's what we do. Now, Squidward being at the beach, I mentioned this in the reactions, didn't really make much sense. Plankton being there, okay, he's trying to sell chum. A little weird he decided to do it at the beach, but I'll buy it. He's a struggling businessman, he'll try anything. SpongeBob and Patrick, that's what they do. Sandy gets to monitor Goo Lagoon because there's some weird bubbles coming out of Goo Lagoon. Squidward being there doesn't make much sense, but he only has one or two appearances, and they're basically just all for a quick joke. So I'm gonna let that slide. It doesn't really matter. Then there's Sandy, who is really weird in this episode, to put it bluntly. Essentially, what Sandy is doing throughout the entire first part of the episode is she's warning, oh my god, these goo bubbles are very dangerous. We can't touch them. However, the only reason they actually got dangerous, and I'm putting dangerous in quotes because they aren't really dangerous in the sense of they'll hurt people or kill people. They really just make things dirty. Okay, they're no more dangerous than large chunks of dirt. Not pleasant, but it's not really what I'd call dangerous. But the only reason it got that bad in the first place was because Plankton, in another attempt to steal the formula, was intentionally bringing out these really large goo bubbles out of Goo Lagoon. Like this one really large goo bubble out of Goo Lagoon. If that were never to have happened, Sandy would have just sounded like completely paranoid and insane. And that's essentially what she is. She admitted later she didn't even know what would happen if it would pop or why they were dangerous. She needed to run tests on that. And yet she's spending the first part of this episode just declaring them dangerous. And she doesn't actually explain why they're dangerous as well. It's another thing I noticed. There are two times, one when SpongeBob and Patrick first start messing with them, and another when Perch Perkins is getting footage about people's reaction to it. One of the people he talks to is Sandy, and on both those occasions he could have said something like, these could pop and cause a massive disaster, or for that matter, there may be more coming up, or some other thing that could realistically make them dangerous. And we do see people getting hurt, and in my opinion, really good slapstick, because of their actions around the goo. So she could say something like that. But no, instead, what we get is these are dangerous. Why are they dangerous? Because they are, for the first part of the episode. And guys, that is a really, really minor problem compared to everything else because I would consider this a really funny and really awesome episode, truth be told. outside of that complaint about the characterization. Everything else is completely solid. The writing is really good. It's just those few little pieces that stop me from calling this perfect that I'm really only focusing on because this is a review. If I were just normally watching this and not analyzing it, I would have never noticed, essentially. And if I'm someone in SpongeBob's target age group, I would have never noticed that. Everything else is great. The animation's really good, although I swear I've seen the purple goo somewhere else in the show. It was the episode with, like, the giant snails. You know the one I'm talking about? They had really similar purple-looking bubbles, and that's the only thing I could really think of. But besides that, the animation is really solid and really good. It enhances the jokes really well. The voice acting is really good. Guys, this episode is nearly perfect, except for those few little bits that you could pick at the very start. So can I recommend it came from Goo Lagoon? Yes, if you can ignore the very minor story problems I just mentioned. Okay? And I can call this one of the funniest things I've seen in a while. But if you can't, then I understand. I think you're a little bit too cynical. I think you're a little too negative, and that's coming from me. But at the same time, I understand and I would not recommend this to you. But I would genuinely recommend checking this episode out if you just like some good old screwball comedy, if you like some good old SpongeBob comedy. So, yeah, and that brings us to the end of another reaction and review. I am Ephrom, and good night.